Hello and welcome to another episode of Releasing Your Inner Dragon with Drake and Marie. I am Marie Mullaney. I'm a fantasy author and YouTuber, and with me, as always, is my co-host Drake.
Max Alexander Drake, award-winning novelist, work in the video game market, TV, movies.
So today we're going to talk about plot outlines, how to create them, what plot beats to hit, why you should create a plot outline, and the dangers of creating a plot outline, and the times when you should not be married to it. So a lot of exciting stuff to talk about today. But before we do get into that, please remember, like, subscribe, share with your friends. The algorithms only love us if you love us. So show them that you love us and they will love us too. Okay.
And we haven't grown. We're averaging about 500 downloads now. We need to get that up. We need to double that if we're going to actually make enough money so that it just pays for the podcast, so that we're not coming out of pocket. That's really what we're hoping for. And we're not even talking about labor or time or anything. We're talking about just paying for the service. So we still need to kind of get to double where we're at. You need to be about 1,000 average downloads. And we can get there. There's more than 500 people out there that are writing stories that need this kind of advice and would appreciate this. So please put this on your writers groups, put this out there, let them know that there's a really cool podcast they can listen to.
Yeah. Okay. So outlining. So I want to start by talking about plot beats. So the thing about at least having in your head how the plot beats will go is that you can then write towards those plot beats. So what I mean by plot beats is there's the typical hero's journey plot beats, right? So these are where you have the ordinary world, what we on this podcast call the everyman moments. Then there's the call to adventure. The hero can refuse the call. There's meeting the mentor, crossing the threshold where the hero commits and goes on the adventure. And then they face their time of, trials where they meet allies and enemies and tests and so on. And then they approach the central crisis of the story. They go through the ordeal where they learn the central theme of their journey. And then at the end, they gain the reward. And so those are the absolute classic plot beats for hero's journey. And they are also what we've discussed before as tent poles. And when we went through Magic Falls plotting, we discussed, we said, okay, what is this character's everyman moment? What is their ordinary world? What is their call to adventure? How does that hook into the bigger story? But you cannot create that for a character until you understand what your plot story is, right? So first you've got to understand kind of what your plot of this thing is going to be. But you also cannot be so tied into doing it for your plot that you don't do it for your character. So you kind of need some idea on the plot side, and then you go for the character, and then you go back to the plot, and then you go back to the character, and then you go back. So it's not a linear thing. You're not going to go and march down the steps like a metronome.
Yeah, basically, it's that you can't create anything until everything is created, but you can't create everything until you start creating without creating anything.
Yeah.
So it is kind of that amalgam of, you just got to be flexible. You got to be able to, and if you watched us do that, now we were a little bit more rigid during the podcast. We kind of started from the beginning and worked our way through. But before that, when we were just kicking around the ideas, and actually Marie is the one that really came up with the idea initially, because it was supposed to be a story that she was just going to do. And it was a lot of just back and forth and, generalization and all of that before we really started getting into it. But as we'll discuss in this podcast, it still didn't stay where it was as we worked through it.
Exactly. So those plot beats help you get an idea of your plot. Then you go and you put your character into each of them. And you do the same for each point of view character. I do want to emphasize this. Please don't have point of view characters who are not going to follow the plot beats. Even if your plot beats are not this, even if you're not following the hero's journey, if you're following a different set of plot beats or whatever, please, your point of view characters need a progression. They cannot exist just to tell the story, because that's boring. It's boring. Characters need to grow. There needs to be.
And when you look at so those are called peripheral narrators. It is a legitimate thing, but when you look at the peripheral narrators that actually exist, and everybody knows about, it's because they had a journey of their own. So the two most famous that I use for teaching is John Carraway from The Great Gatsby. Mm-hmm. So he was not the protagonist. The Gatsby was the protagonist, but he was the narrating character. But he took this journey. He grew as a person. He had to struggle with the decisions, not that he made, but the struggles that Gatsby made. And then the other one is Watson. Watson is not, Sherlock, because Sherlock knows everything, and he would be a horrible, POV character. But Watson learns and grows and has to deal with, and that's the beauty of Sherlock, because Sherlock walks in, figures out the entire thing, and then goes, "All right, Watson, what do you think?" And he's like, "Well, I think maybe this." And he's like, "Really? Do you have some evidence for that? Because maybe you should look again." I mean, Sherlock already knows the answer. And so he just takes on this kind of teacher role. So it is legitimate to use narrating characters. The problem is that most people do what you're saying, where it's like, I'm the bard who just sits here and watches.
So I just want to point out that with both of those characters, but especially because, okay, I haven't read The Great Gatsby. Okay, I haven't. I'm sorry. I'm not American. It wasn't on our required reading list. So
So everybody should know that I've never had a required reading list since I didn't go to college or anything like that. And I've tried to read all the classics, and there's only a few that I've ever been able to read. And The Great Gatsby is one of them. It's actually pretty well written for the time. And it's worth the read, in my opinion.
I'll see if I can pick it up then.
It's not like a Moby Dick or a whatever. That's just I've
read all of those. I've read all of those. I've read all of Charles Dickens. I've read all of Jane Austen's. So
since I was never required to read that crap, I tried. I tried. I got a paragraph or a chapter into every one of them. And then it was like, I don't have to take a test on this. What am I doing?
I did read Stein, and I nearly chewed my wrists off. Like, wow, that man writes depressing. Anyway, although I can talk, I mean, but we have some entertaining winter authors here when it gets dark and gloomy and everybody's just waiting for the sun to come back, and they're writing like depression porn. So where was I? Oh, Sherlock Holmes, right? So the narrator. Sherlock, the reason why Watson works as a narrator, Sherlock never changes.
Right.
Sherlock goes on zero character journey throughout those entire stories. He does not grow. He does not change.
The Gatsby is that way too, which is why Gatsby ends tragically for Gatsby.
Yeah, and it would have been a boring story told from Sherlock's perspective because he doesn't change. But it would
also be a paragraph long. Sherlock walks in the room, realizes the butler did it, tells the cops the butler did it, gives them the evidence, and walks home. Like, that's the whole story.
But Watson does grow.
Yes.
Watson.
Yes, so did Nick Carraway in The Great Gatsby.
Watson,
the point of view character grew, and that's the point you were making. So it's not necessarily the fact that they were peripheral narrators. I just want to make that distinction, because the way you kind of said it was, don't use peripheral narrators.
No,
it's more what you're, and you're 100% right in what you're saying. It's your POV character must grow, whether they are the protagonist who's actually fighting the dragon and saving, the kingdom from death or not. That's fine. Well, it's the same thing in, it was really the same thing in, what's his name? Don Quixote, where, we were the sidekick, but still the sidekick is the one who grew. Don Quixote was just crazy. Like, he didn't really grow. he was fighting dragons that were just buildings. So that dude's crazy. But so yeah, it was the same thing, there. It's just you have to make sure that the point of view character, because the point of view character is who the reader is connected to. It's the only thing, it's the reason why they're in the story. It's how they're experiencing the story. And I think, and you read a lot more.
The POV character does not need to be the protagonist.
Right.
That's important. But the POV character has to grow.
You read a lot more, unpublished work than I do. Outside of the people who pay me to do it. And I think we've talked about this before, where you're like, you weren't impressed with the story or whatever. Basically, it comes down to this. A lot of writers fall into the trap that they think that the adventure is the important part. The adventure is what the reader is going to care about. And so they write a peripheral narrator that just sits there and watches everything, but isn't actually involved and doesn't grow and doesn't change. And the writer who writes that thinks, but I'm describing this really amazing adventure that these guys like, but it doesn't matter. In prose, that works in scripts because we're all, peripheral narrators in a movie. But in a prose, the only way to win in prose is to connect the reader to the person that's narrating the story. That's why third person omniscient is just a dead POV. It's why half the people who started reading Lord of the Rings, the most famous book ever, half the people who started don't finish.
Yeah.
Because it has that third person omniscient. You're not connected to the person telling the story. And without that, you seriously hinder the reader's ability to enjoy the story.
Yeah.
In 1954, when there was only one fantasy story on the market, well, technically you could say two with the whole Chronicles of Narnia. I can't remember if Chronicles of Narnia came out before or after Tolkien.
At the same time.
Yeah, it's in that same era. But still, okay, so you have two. You have two. Yeah. Like, even if they suck, you have two. You're going to read them. Like, it's all you got. If you're into this thing, you got choice, A or B.
I don't know if you knew this about them, about Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, but they were friends, right? And Lewis was an atheist, and Tolkien reconverted him to Christianity.
I didn't know that, actually. It's an interesting, yeah. But again, of course they were friends. They were two. That first writers group that I joined, like I've told that story before. I walked in the door, and this is 20 years ago, so I'm in my 30s, and it's a bunch of people who, well, they're my age now, but there's a bunch of people that are 50, 60, 70 years old, and they're all writing their memoirs. And there was this one black dude that wrote fantasy. So me and him were like, hey, and we connected, and we did, everything together, because it was two fantasy guys in a room filled with people writing memoirs. So yeah, of course, Lewis and Tolkien were friends. They were the only two in the room writing fantasy.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Anyway, so to get back to the POVs and your point of view character and your protagonist doesn't have to be the same. You can have a protagonist who's not the POV, but your POV has to grow.
Yes.
Please don't just have a POV who's just telling a story. That's
why I always say, don't waste a chapter going into a POV's head that's it. The scene takes place in a bar, but your POV is going to leave the bar, and you need more information to give to the reader. So the POV leaves the bar, you scene break or chapter break, and now we get a chapter from the bartender's perspective.
Yeah.
No, don't do that. Be smarter, figure out a different way to do it. Don't be lazy. You're wasting time.
Also don't forget about this. And I think that this is a very important lesson that I learned when I spoke to a fan who also is one of my critiquers. So we met through Critique Circle, and he became a fan of my writing, and I enjoy his writing and so on. So we critique each other's work and so on. And I was discussing whether I should do a once-off chapter from a character who is going to be a POV character in the next book's perspective. And I was like, because he's the character that's most emotionally impacted by the scene. And what he said to me is, no, I've been following Louis for 2 books. I want to know how Louis feels about the emotions this character is feeling. I don't care about this dude.
Yep.
And I think that's also important. The way that the other character's emotions makes your POV character feels is often more impactful than the other character's emotions because the reader is attached to the character.
The only person that loves every character in your story is you.
Yep.
No one else. You think that it's going to be awesome to give the, emotions of this one character because you love them. And I'm talking about the proverbial you here. But the reader wants to know, they're in love with the main character and they want to know how the main character feels about the situation, even if the other person is impacted. I mean, like, if I'm traveling in a car and one of my friends is traveling in another car and their car is going to get in a wreck and he's going to lose a leg in that crash. He's obviously more impacted by that moment than I am. But if everybody's been following me, they're going to be way more interested in how I react to my friend getting a wreck and losing his leg than my friend actually doing it.
Yes.
Not that he's not impacted more, absolutely. But it's still, he's not been connected to the reader. The reader has been connected to me as the POV character. Now I'm going to grow through that and I'm going to change through that. That tragedy that somebody else is experiencing.
Yes.
So that's the thing. I mean, it really comes down to what I always say, one of my Drakeisms. No one loves your characters. No one loves every character in your story other than you. The reader definitely doesn't. And so head hopping or, having a completely separate chapter with some rando bartender is just, it breaks it. It just doesn't do what you think it's going to do. And the cool thing about when you get in a situation like that, which kind of brings us back to the topic that we're talking about here, the cool thing is when you have an easy answer, but it's not going to be as advantageous to the story, it forces you to do your job, to actually work to become a better storyteller, to come up with a better way to get that information to the reader instead of taking this shortcut that just weakens your story.
Okay, so we've spoken about POV again. It is a recurring theme on the show. So take them through that journey. But that is not the only journey. And sometimes people will, get kind of hooked up on the hero's journey and so on. But for example, a romance story beat is quite different. So with a romance story, your beats are meet cute or initial attraction. This is the point in the story where the two love interests first meet. Then you have a conflict or obstacle. Something happens to create a conflict between the two characters, misunderstanding, disagreement, something happens.
One's an angel, one's a demon.
The
just talk about that.
One
earlier.
Character pursues the others, and often with grand gestures and romantic, flowers and whatnot. There's a first date kiss. The characters go on a date, share a kiss, make a turning point in their relationship. They fall in love. The characters start to develop deeper feelings for each other, spend more time together. The big misunderstanding. Something happens to create a misunderstanding and break the relationship. Then the grand gesture. Somebody rocks up underneath your window with a whole band playing a serenade or whatever the case might be. Some grand gesture to resolve the conflict. And then resolution. The conflict is resolved. The two characters come together and start a new chapter in their relationship, leading to happily ever after.
Yep.
Now, the interesting thing is you can have a plot story that follows the hero's journey plot beats. And you can have a romance story intersecting with it in terms of a character growth arc.
I haven't written my romance in 6 or 7 years now. I've kind of abandoned that line because I started writing romance because it made money quicker than my fantasy did. And then now I'm making money doing this other stuff. I need to finish these last 2 books because I did really like them. But that's where the angel demon came from, because I'm writing a romance where there's an angel and a demon that have fallen in love with each other. So I don't use the romance beat chart. I use the hero's journey beat chart. But all of those things are scenes that are in there, even though I'm not following it exactly. But it's the reason why my romance stories are not your typical, a lot of romance are literally just change the window dressing and, you know, give it a different character name. It's the exact same story over. And that's why a romance writer can write 10 a year, you know, because they're not thinking about changing anything major. That's boring to me. I can't do that. So, you know, the romance stories that I've written have always followed the hero's journey, which gives me a lot of flexibility and a lot more robustness and, you know, ability to tell a more dynamic story. But the elements of the romance are still there. Like, it was funny when you were going through that, the opening chapter of that book, the angel daydreams back to when they when her and the demon met 5,000 years before then. And it literally was just your meet cute. Yeah, it's all there. It's just, you know, I'm following the hero's journey, which that means. So what does that mean? It means that the difference is, and the reason why I like to layer my romances underneath the hero's journey is the fact that with the romance, it's just the romance. That's what the entire story is about. We're gonna beat it out. We're gonna follow this romance, and we're gonna do this. That's why they're so similar, because there's not a lot to it. Hero's journey has what, 150, 200 different elements that can or cannot be used in it. And they don't have to be used exactly when they're supposed to be used, you know, based off of, you know, Joseph Campbell or whatever. So there's a lot of flexibility with toying with things. Maybe stuff that happens in Act 1, a couple of those elements we can put in Act 2 or vice versa or whatever. So like the most, and I don't give Stephen King props very often because I don't think he's all that great of a storyteller, because he's very, in my mind, very obvious where the story's going. The one story that he did that blew my mind was, and I've talked about it many times, is Shawshank Redemption. You don't get the everyman moment until the third act. Like, that is so amazing to me that you actually don't really relate to I can't think of the main characters, Andy Dufresne, until the third act. Like, that is mind-blowing. I don't know of any other story that has ever even attempted to accomplish that, when you actually know that he's innocent and that he's been innocent this whole time, and he's known he's innocent this whole time. Like, you don't get that. Like, even like The Fugitive. Like, you got to watch the one-armed man kill Harrison Ford's wife. Right up front. You know Harrison Ford is innocent. With Andy Dufresne, you meet him and he's drunk and he's fondling a pistol. You're like, yeah, no, he killed her. Like, he killed her. That's just what he killed her. Like, it's killed her and the lover, and I don't blame him. Whatever. You know, and you follow him for that reason. But like, the everyman moment really doesn't happen until the third act. And that's mind-blowing to me. I do think that Shawshank Redemption is just beautiful on so many different writing levels. Which is also why I don't believe that he pantsed that. Like, he says he only pantses. I think he plotted that a little bit out, because that's some trickiness. That's some devious storytelling there. So bringing that back in, I wanted to add, if you are a pantser, it's fine. But even having what we call the tent poles, just a general outline of these 5 beats, the everyman moment, the call to adventure, or the inciting incident is what I call it, the mid-act 2 climax, the overcome, and the return. If you just have those 5 things, just those things that you're going to think about, and kind of put those in place in a very general term, your writing is going to improve a millionfold for getting to the end of that story, as opposed to, I don't even know where I'm going. I'm just going to sit down and start making stuff up.
And I want to fully get behind that statement, because even before I met you, my pantsing, I do pants, and I still pants, but I always had at least kind of a 10-point bullet breakdown of like, this is what's going to happen in the story before I start writing. Because here's the thing. You need a true north to aim at. Otherwise, the story just goes like that, and it goes nowhere. Okay?
Right,
you have to know what you want towards the end of it. Like, what is the actual story that you're telling? And then you can pants everything else. towards that end goal. And it can meander a little bit and so on. You can tighten it later, that's fine. But you need that goal to aim at. And those kind of tent poles or like a breakdown or hitting the plot beats, they help. So even if you're a pantser, take the plot beats and just go, okay, these are the plot beats I'm going to hit. Whichever plot beats you want to hit.
Yeah. And that is, one of the big differences between me and you, and the fact that I'm such a heavy plotter and you're such a heavy pantser. But to that end, how do you feel that Magic Fall has been going for you with as heavy as we actually plotted it?
So I'm in two minds. On the one hand, I think it has helped me write smoother. On the other hand, I think I'm building a little less on the world. Because part of the reason why my world building is so deep on Sangwheel is because as I'm going through, I'm like, I better build a couple of things here. I better do something here to give me a base. And I build all these little things as a base before I move on. And I'm not doing that in Magic Fall because we've got the whole thing outlined. So I'm just writing towards the end. It's instead of like stopping and broadening a bit and kind of taking a meandering walk to smell the roses, I'm kind of sprinting for the end. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
Well, actually, that was one of the things that I was going to talk about offline, but we can definitely talk about it here because we have no secrets. Now that the first draft of Act 1 is written, so here's something that you have improved me on and impressed upon me and made me a better writer. So I've been working on the Realm, the 20 novel fantasy saga, since 2019. Got just tons of stuff, and I focus on the plot of the story. I don't focus on world building like you do. And we did lose a year for me to do the whole cancer thing, and that sucked. But and we've also lost one of the authors. He's still around. He just life took him out, and he's now just unable to continue helping us with this. So there's only 3 of us now.
Yeah.
But we've got plot boards and post-it notes and notebooks and all sorts of sessions and tons of recordings because we meet every week on Zoom and do story stuff. And I'm trying to, I didn't realize how little I actually plot world building stuff and how much I pants world building stuff. And so 2 weeks ago, not even that long ago, what was it about? I think it was about a week and a half ago. No, probably a week ago. I think it was Thursday. I don't remember. It's been a really weird week for me because I've written over 50,000 words in the last 6 days. And it's all been world building, 100%. Because what I decided to do, this is really your fault. What I decided to do was just I started noticing things in what the other guys are writing. When you're dealing with a team like this, the more opportunities for everybody to pants things, the more opportunities for the story to go awry. That's what I'm learning. And so it becomes very difficult on me to have to rewrite and re-wrangle them in because they've done something because in my head, I've got this big picture. And that's why it's so easy for me to pants world building. Because when I come up with something, I've got the whole story in my head. So when I create an item or a thing or a ritual or a holiday or whatever, I'm already, it's already going through the matrix of my brain of, oh yeah, no, this enhances the story that I'm doing and it doesn't hurt anything. But since most of this stuff is still in my head, when the other guys create something like a holiday, it's like, yeah, no, that actually breaks this other aspect that you didn't know anything about. And so, this 50,000 words, there's 7 races. This 50,000 words was on one race. One race, their area, what they have, their traditions, their everything. And so the story, and I did it because I need to get a story set in this to one of the authors. And now they have so many hooks. They know exactly what's going on. I even did stuff like, in the hook, it says, and then, she goes to the kitchen and talks to one of the cooks. Well, now the cook is named, described, personality, like there's an entire character document just on this one character that's going to be in one scene, maybe never again in the story, but there's 500 words written on her that you have all those details. I created a bunch of creatures and just even insects and plants and just crazy stuff that I just went down this rabbit hole of just world building. And it's all I did was world build, nothing but world building. And everything is described in detail and everything is fleshed out. And I'm even getting some art done to throw in the documents. So not only do I have my description, but they also have a piece of art they can look at. And you're to blame to that. But I think that is going to be such a boon for where we're at and organizing the story and making sure everybody is consistent. So maybe we should let you do that and I know you started it because we talked about that before the show. You started about how you started making up creatures of the world and everything like that.
That'll be for outside, but I'll give you an example. Okay. So and I have started doing it for the outside world, for the world beyond the dome. But I'll give you an example from Sangwheel Chronicles. Okay. The merchant guilds outside of Sangwheel Chronicles, the merchant guild in Somfa, in one city, in Somfa, right, have got stalls that are attached to the merchant guilds, and street vendors sell stuff from those stalls. Those stalls are called the shit stalls. Okay, they're called the shit stalls because the other guilds, because the guild buildings are all in upmarket areas of Somfa, right? So the other guilds don't like the fact that the merchant guilds allow street vendors to sell from them. So they cart in animal shit some evenings and dump it around these stalls. Then the merchant guild pays for street washers to come wash the streets. Okay, and that's where the name shit stalls comes from. And they call it the shit stalls war, and whether the merchant guild smells sweet or whether it smells like shit depends on how intense the shit stall war is. There is no reason for this piece of world building at all. None. It has no plot relevance. It does sweet blow fuck all for the plot.
Well,
but it adds so much to the world.
Right.
Nobody's ever going to interact with, nobody's even bought anything from these street vendors. But it's just the story adds to the world.
Right. And it makes it feel more real.
Yeah, it makes it feel more real. And the problem with Magic 4 at the moment is that I haven't done that for the city we're in. Because I have been sprinting through the chapters on a plan. So I need to go back and put a little bit more like shit stalls in, for want of a better word.
We need to have a shit stall draft.
We need to have like world building crap. Like just stuff that does nothing to do with the plot. It doesn't, it's just this world is lived in. That's all.
Yeah. And so
I
do that on the fly.
Yes, but I think that the problem with a heavy outline, at least for some writers, for me specifically with this one now, that I've found, is that the outline is because I'm essentially in my head I'm sprinting to an end goal. Whereas when I've got less of an outline, I'm like, okay, so I know I need to get there, but I'm not quite sure how to get there. So let me write it. Let me write some shit stalls. Why are these?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. You're exploring.
Yes. And then I'm like, okay, that's not important, but it's really cool. So I'm going to keep it. So let me go explore something else.
And that's what I'm kind of doing. That's what I've done this last week. This entire last week has been just making shit stalls.
Yeah.
That's going to be our term now. You two are going to, kick us off because of our term, but that's going to be our term.
Yeah. So, and I do think that is important. I do think it's important to make some shit stalls that they don't have to have anything to do with the plot. No one ever has to interact heavily with them. It's just a cute story that,
it adds depth to the world.
It adds depth to the world.
And so that's what I'm working on. That's what I've been doing for the realm for this last week.
Yeah.
And then
so I don't think like Magic Falls world building is bad, but I don't think it's as deep as Sangwheel.
Right.
But to be fair, Sangwheel is 3 books in. Like, of course, the world building is deep.
Right. Well, also, it's a different story. I mean, we're
Yeah.
doing more of a YA story with Magic Fall, whereas the others are epic fantasy. And so, that's the cool thing about being an epic fantasy writer. Um, so if you're an adventure fantasy writer and you decide to take a sidetrack, I don't know why you would do that and write an epic fantasy because it's 10 times the work. But if you decide to do that, only a handful of your fans are going to follow you down that other one, because adventure fantasy readers find epic fantasy too thick, too heavy, too weighty. Yeah. But epic fantasy fans, we love taking a vacation and reading a story that's just not as heavy, that we can just kind of breeze through. So, when I do take these sidetracks into a non-epic fantasy story, my fans will pretty much all follow, because like, oh, a break. Like, we got a cool little easy story that we can just kind of breeze through, and it's all, nice and simple. And then we can get back to the real heavy, thick, meat and potatoes, gravy story. So
look,
that is one of the cool things.
I do still want to put in those shit stalls. Like, I do want the world.
Oh, certainly. Certainly. And that's what I said. Now that the first draft is done, maybe you take, because, I still have a lot to do in the first draft for my side of the writing side of it. So maybe this is a really good time for you to also do what you do best, which is world building.
Yeah.
And just take a break for a minute.
Yeah, I need to take I think a week and just run through the chapters and see like where I get a spark of an idea to do a little bit more on, and to explore a little bit more, and to
yes.
Yeah. But yeah, I can also do that like afterwards. Like, it's not, it's not something that I have to put in, that I have to insert right now. And hopefully I'll beta read
Well, I need to catch up.
Yeah.
That's the only reason I was saying.
Yeah. And hopefully our beta readers will be able to.
For those in the audience, I was going to say, for those in the audience, I've been a naughty boy, and I've actually not been working on Magic Fall for the last 2 weeks or so, since we've been, and I say since Marie has been really pounding through the first draft. So I've been a naughty boy, but so I'm really just trying to say, take a week off and world build so I get caught up.
Okay. I can do that.
But yeah. But no, you're also, incredibly good at the world building side too. So
and I do enjoy it. I do like rolling around in the world and smelling the roses and going, is it called a rose though? Is it?
And see, that's where I'm a lot weaker at. Not because I can't do it, but because I am hyper focused on the story and the emotions and the journey and everything like that. That's what I focus on. So I think that's what I brought to the table when we were plotting. And I think we have a really good, tight story all the way to the end. And now it's the work of fleshing all that out. So,
one of the things that I really want to talk about, speaking about the first draft of Act 1, is the importance of not marrying your outline. Okay, so let's put aside the pantsing for the moment. Let's say, okay, we are now all plotters. Let's pretend to all be plotters. And you've plotted out your entire book. You have your scenes, and you set off on your own. If you get a better idea in chapter whatever, don't be afraid of changing your outline. Your outline is not your story. No one except you is going to know if you change your outline. Well, you'll all know if we change.
Unless you talk about it on our podcast.
Because we talk about it. But you, the proverbial you, no one's going to know. And that happens.
I'll go a step further than that. I'll go a step further than that. Your story isn't your story until you're ready for it to be. Yes. So, we had a thing last week, or maybe earlier this week, where you pinged me and you were like, I'm not happy with this whole Laron thing. So we had our chapter set up and we know where the Laron story is going. And so really it was, you didn't know exactly what you were having a problem with, but you were like, I'm just having this problem and I'm thinking about whatever. And that's when I had us take a step back. I was like, well, wait a minute now. and I kind of became the psychiatrist, and I was like, what is your problem with this? And then I had you really delve into figuring out what the problem is. And then once it was there, I was like, okay, well, here's an option that could fix that. And then here's a different option that could fix that. And I actually think I got it on the second one where you were like, okay, yeah, that one actually fixes my problem. So what it really is, and that exercise that we did without really talking about it, because we didn't have a lot of time, and I wasn't in teaching mode. I was just in trying to fix mode. It was, when you think there's a problem, don't fix it before you know what the problem is.
Yes.
And so, because your original thing was to cut his entire first chapter and change some other stuff, I'm like, well, that information has to get in there somehow. You can cut it. And I even said that day. I was like, cut it if you want. I don't care. But that's why I slowed us down. It's like, but what is the problem? Where are we at? What's happening in the story? What are you not having enough time for? And so on and so forth. And so taking that moment to really delve into what the issue is from a storytelling standpoint, then you can go, all right, now that we understand the issue, what needs, and it was actually his second chapter, or maybe his third chapter, that ended up getting cut.
So he's the end of his second chapter changed, and his third chapter changed dramatically.
Yeah.
And then his fourth chapter stayed exactly the same.
Right. So, once we dove into what the problem was, then you can start looking for solutions. And again, there's no holding anything sacred. If we had lost the first chapter, if we had lost the second chapter, if we lost the seventh chapter, it didn't matter what we're going to lose. What matters is you had run into a problem that you felt the story was weakened. You didn't know why, and you were looking for a solution with it. And so once we dove into that and figured out what the actual issue was, then we were able to actually come up with solutions to fix that issue.
And the more I learn about the art of writing, the more I realize how dramatically similar it is to computer science. Because in computer science, we've got a term for it when you try and solve the problem before you understand the problem. We call it solutioning. We say you're solutioning instead of analyzing.
There you go. You were solutioning when you called me.
I thought I understood the problem, right?
Right.
But the point is to, and this is where having somebody to work with comes in really useful, because
I was literally just going to say that.
Because if you have somebody that you can talk to about and say, listen, so this is what I've got in front of me, and it's not going there. It's not working. Then you can talk through why it's not going there, and then you can come up with a solution.
So this is a great example of how somebody else who is not working with a writing partner can handle this, because I got bogged down with tons of other projects. Basically, just to let everybody know, I remember I was supposed to write all the Laron stuff. Marie was going to write all the Burry stuff. I was so far behind that Marie was like, look, I am decent at just writing first drafts, and you're struggling with this. So why don't you just let me write all the first drafts? And you're much better at just coming behind me and editing the crap out of it. So you then do all the chapters that way. And so now we've divided our time up between those two. And I'm still way behind, but neither here nor there. So now I'm no longer in the driving seat at all. I was in the driver's seat when we were plotting and stuff like that, but now you've taken the wheel and you're driving the truck, and like I don't really know. I'm not paying attention to the road or the signposts that we're passing. So what we had earlier this week when we had that discussion was exactly what an author who is doing their own thing. You sit down with somebody and you have to explain it to them. That's what you had to do to me. That's why I was like, well, I don't understand. Like, you're going to have to catch me up. You're going to have to explain this to me. And by forcing her to go through and explain it to me, even if now I am strong at storytelling, and so, that's what we have. Both of us are storytellers. But even if I wasn't, I've done that before with like my wife or with a friend or whatever. I'm like, you know what? Let me explain, because you don't understand this because you've never read a single word. So let me really explain to you what I'm trying to do. And normally when I do that, I will then come up, it forces me to see the solution and then also pick it. But when I'm not talking to somebody, I can't find a solution. I'm talking to myself and I'm like, I don't understand what this is broken and I can't fix it. Why can't I come up with an idea? It's that act of breaking it down to somebody who doesn't understand it, to literally teach it to them that either they can come up with ideas and pitch it back to me. And that's why, I talk about Charlie all the time on the podcast. He's my engineer friend. He's not a writer. He doesn't know story structure or anything, but he is a brilliant man and throws ideas at me like a fire truck. I don't know why I said fire truck, a fire hose. He's a fire hose of ideas. I don't know what a fire truck of ideas would be. But anyway, so he just throws ideas at me and allows me to kind of sift through them. And then plus I've got my own ideas coming. And so it's the act of explaining it to somebody who doesn't understand it that I think is the important part. So yes, me and Marie are both storytellers. Me and Marie are both, good at what we do. We can bounce this stuff back and forth and improve each other's stuff. But if you're not in a situation like that, I promise you, just forcing yourself to explain it to somebody who doesn't understand it, whether they're a writer or not, 9 times out of 10, you're going to find your solution in there. You're going to start seeing it from a different angle, because it's one of the reasons why I love teaching writing. I have become a billion times better writer since I started teaching over these last 15 years than I ever could if I had not done that in this last 15 years. When you teach, you are forced to look at the same stuff from different angles, because, I'll teach it to somebody and they're like, I don't get it. And I'm like, why? That's how I understand it. Why don't you get it? Like, you're just stupid. No. Then you go, okay. As a teacher, you go, okay. Then let me give you a different way to look at it. And they're like, I still don't get it. And like, let me give you a third way to look at it. And it's the same topic, just coming from different angles, but it forces the teacher to have to do that. And then they go, oh, I understand what you're saying now. But now I understand it 3 times better than I did before, because I had to come up with 3 different ways. So it's the same thing with story, forcing yourself to go through and actually teach that moment in time, this fictitious moment in time, to somebody. You start seeing it from different angles, because they're not going to understand everything. And so they're going to ask questions and they're going to force you to just take a moment. And so that's what I did with you when you called me up. I immediately went into, you got to explain it to me. Let's look for this. So, and then we found a really good solution, I think.
It's very funny, because then the reason why I laughed while you were telling the story is
you're thinking about junior programmers that you've done this exact same thing to, aren't you?
No. I'm thinking about the term we have for programming. We're like, explain it to the cardboard cutout developer first before you ask for help. Put a cardboard cutout of somebody on your desk and explain it to them, or a rubber duck. You can also have a rubber duck, and explain it to the rubber duck. And if you can't solve your problem by explaining to the rubber duck, then ask a human.
That's funny. That's sad and lonely and depressing, but funny.
But yeah, I need a person. The thing is, the reason why we say it is because 9 times out of 10, through the act of explaining to somebody else what your problem is, you're like, oh fuck, never mind, this is what my problem is.
Right.
Help, never mind, this is what my problem is. Like, we're on YouTube.
And if you're of that mindset, so for me, I can't do that. I need, I've got some friends that I'll talk story with that are just fans. I mean, they were friends before I became an author, but they're definitely just fans that, of the writing. They don't ever give me any advice. They don't ever give me any opinions. They don't ever do anything. But just the act of talking to them about my problem allows me to find a solution for my problem. Yes. And they never even give me, I mean, basically they are a cardboard cutout or a rubber ducky sitting on my desk. I just can't talk to an inanimate object. I need a living, breathing thing. It used to be my wife. She finally got tired of it. She was like, look, I will read everything you write after it's published. Don't talk to me about it beforehand. So that's how it works there. So I have other friends that I force to suffer to be my sounding board. But I think it's very important. And it's so funny that it just happened, here recently, that exact same thing. And then it also comes down to not being married to anything. Like, you had already written the chapter of stuff that caused you the grief. And then it was like, use that for something else. Just don't do that. And you were like, oh my goodness, yes. And you just threw it away. All gone.
It honestly, it's minor. In the third book of Sangwheel Chronicles, I must have thrown away 40-odd thousand words.
Yeah. See, and that's why I'm such a heavy plotter, is because I hate throwing away stuff. But in this case, that would have been me writing that chapter, and we still would have had that same discussion, and you still would not have been happy with it. And more than likely, we still would have came up with the same answer. And then I would have been rewriting that chapter.
Yeah, because the problem was that plot beat happened too fast. Like that thing, there was too much going on there, and the plot didn't. Then the rest of the plot didn't have room to breathe, because we have the act is so, it's a
but it was also one
story. It's a go story.
Once you forced me, because that's really what you also did. You forced me to revisit my plot and look at it. And I say my plot, it was our plot, but I'm just saying you forced me to take a look at it. And once you pointed it out to me, it was like, oh, it's not even needed. It's not that it was a mistake, which it was.
Yes.
Everything you mentioned, it comes too quick. It crushes the rest of the story down. It takes up room, but it's not even that it came too quick. It doesn't need to come at all.
Yeah.
Like it literally.
It adds nothing.
It added nothing. It just took away. And so you forced me to take a look at that and go, yeah, no, we don't even need to go back there. We don't need to do this again. Yeah. Just for transparency's sake. Originally, we had Laron dealing with his father and the emotions of his father much greater. And so that's what that chapter dealt with. He goes back and his father kind of treats him like a child and everything else. But that's not a hero, and it doesn't need to be there. We already, the story is not about his relationship with his father. That is a very minor part of this story. And so giving it its own complete chapter to explore that relationship, it's not what the story's about. It doesn't have payoff at the end. He doesn't come back and have that payoff with his father. So that's what you really forced me to do, is you forced me to take a step back. And that's why the solution that I came up with is, just don't have him go back to his father. Just have him just do it. Yeah. So he was going to go back to his father and ask for, this thing, and his father would then send some people to do this thing. And it was like, just have him do the thing. Yeah. Just have him make the decision.
Skip the whole parent thing. Just right. Because the thing is, like, his motivation's already there in how his father treats him in chapter 2. So we can we leverage that moment. We make it really heavy. We give him the motivation at the end of at the end of his second chapter, and he's off on the quest. And that gives me a whole chapter to run an investigation with, which is what I needed. Instead of cramming the investigation into a half one chapter, now we have 2 chapters. Yes, exactly. So, so again, it's about making sure you have the attitude. There's 2 attitudes there that we're talking about. One, be humble. Know that you are not perfect. You can make mistakes. At my writers group meeting last night, I literally talked about how, so the only first draft that I actually wrote of Magic Ball was that first chapter of Laron's. And it was so funny because I've said this on the podcast. I teach this in my classes. It's one of my big pet peeves. It's one of my Drakeisms. We've talked about it within the last couple of podcasts. But after Marie read it, she came back to me and she said, so Drake, what's the one thing if you do in your first page of your first chapter that tells you started the story in the wrong spot? And I'm like, do a flashback on the first page. And she's like, yeah, you probably want to take a look at what you did. And then, I just started the spot. I started 5 minutes too late. The story needed to be backed up 5 minutes because I was just doing a thing. So we all make mistakes. We all, because it's why you have to critique other people to grow. You are too close to yours. You can't grow by just critiquing your own work. You must critique other people so that you can see the mistakes in theirs that you'll never see in yours. So another Drakeism. But being humble, knowing that you're not perfect, knowing that you can make mistakes, knowing that there's better ideas out there. That's the first thing. And then second thing is, what would be the
term for this, where you don't hold anything sacred, being willing to let go. Just being willing to let go. It's a new idea. It's a better idea. It fixes a problem. It doesn't matter how much work you did on what's about to be, sent to the trash pile. It doesn't matter. It's dead. Just let it die. Let it go. Be willing to sacrifice that effort and time that you've done. And I think that if you have those two things, I think that's the big thing. Just be humble that you're not perfect, and be willing to sacrifice when you've created a bunch of stuff or written a bunch of stuff and you realize that it's the wrong, thing to have done, and you come up with a better thing that fixes that solution. You gotta be a surgeon. You gotta be willing to just cut that dead part out and replace it with vibrant, new, living story.
I could not agree more. I think everybody needs to make peace with that. And if you're a pantser, if you're listening to us going, oh, but that won't happen to me, I'm a pantser or whatever, or you're thinking, maybe like I just write perfect first drafts or whatever, I'd like to remind you that the world's best pantser is Neil Gaiman. And like Stephen King is a good horror writer, in my opinion. And someday we can talk about that, because he puts you into the mind of that character, and I have nightmares. The reason why I don't read Stephen King,
he's great at that.
I have nightmares.
He is great at that, and I will never take that away from him.
Yeah,
but I know where the story's going. Yeah, that's all I'm 100%.
Saying. But that's not what it's about. You know what I mean?
Right. But that's why I don't read horror.
Yeah, 100%. So I mean, people who read horror read it for the horror. Right. I know. I get it. I don't. I hate it, but the 1 or 2 books that I have read from Stephen King, I'm like, nightmares. But the world's best pantser is without a doubt Neil Gaiman. I will die on this hill. In my opinion, the world's best pantser is Neil Gaiman. And
I mean, he's never written the ending of a story, but yes, go ahead. Continue.
And Neil Gaiman's advice is throw your first draft away and write it again once you've written it.
Yeah.
Right? So basically, your first draft is your outline.
Yeah.
And then.
Yeah. So people think I'm crazy when I write like a 40,000 word outline for a 200,000 word book. Yeah. He's writing a 200,000 word outline for a 200,000 word book. And I'm like, yeah, that's too much. That's overkill to me. But whatever, like, here's the thing. There is no wrong answer in all of this stuff. And that's what pisses me off when other people like Stephen King are like, you cannot plot. If you're a plotter, you're not even a real writer. There is actually no wrong answer. There's no wrong way to do this. What there is wrong ways for you to do it. You may not be able to pants. And if you try, it's wrong. You may not be able to plot. And if you try, it's wrong. And it's a sliding scale again, as we've discussed. There's some outlines, there's some this, there's some that. But I always hate it, and that's why I don't do it. I never say you're wrong if you do this way to get to the end of your story. Because if it leads you to the end of your story, you're right. Like, that's just the way it is. Now, it might be wrong for me. It might really, like, the thought of writing a 200,000 word book, throwing it away, and then writing it all over again, which is what I'm doing anyway for the first 3 books of the Genesis saga. Like, that kills me. That is painful for me to have to do this. To do it every single thing I write, I would slit my wrists. I would just be done. Because it's not right for me, but it is right for other people.
Yeah.
So just figure out what works for you and stick with that. The big thing is does it get you to the end of the story? If your way gets you in the story, but it would kill me to do, then it's wrong for me and right for you. That's just the way it is. You just need to figure out what's the right way for you. Try all these different things. That's why I try to talk about all of them, even though I'm not a pantser and I don't, like pantsing, but that's because it's wrong for me. It's not because it's wrong. It's just wrong for me. So it might be right for you. Just figure it out.
I fully agree with that one. So I do think though that you do need those plot beats. Without those plot beats, your story is going to meander all over the place. So get the plot beats.
I mean, again, maybe somebody is just smarter than me and can get that stuff done. Possible.
It's entirely possible. I do think try it with the plot beats. Let's say it like that. Let's say try it with the plot beats.
Right.
Try different styles until you find the one that works for you.
Or don't have a plot beat, write 200,000 words, throw that all away, and then that becomes your plot beat. And you write another story that's the exact same story with the exact same characters, and now you know what you're doing. Yep. Like that's basically what Neil Gaiman, what you were talking about that Neil Gaiman does. You know, he's writing an entire novel as an outline.
I mean, to be fair, like he writes beautiful work. You know.
Yep.
I'm not sure I'm that committed to pantsing, but
right. All right. Well, I think
that's a great note on which to end this podcast. We will see you all for another one.
Bye.